Cool. Okay. Cheers, Toby, and thanks again to well, for everyone to be here again. It's nice to connect with everyone again, especially when it's kind of a group that's returning. And yeah, I mean, I've been in the previous discussions as well, and I think one of the really exciting things for me about the idea of a UBI Lab Arts focus would be in sharing strategies and artistic sort of methods for how we might broaden the conversation about UBI. So the sort of presentation that I've got for now is just to kind of introduce a project that I think did that and a little bit of the background on it. More just as a kind of way of breaking the ice for maybe other people to bring in their ideas as well, and it sort of complements some of the things that Toby's been doing as well. So I'm not going to go into like massive amount of detail on it, but just sort of give you a sense of what it was and when it was done and where it came from. So let me just make sure that I've got this shared properly. Yeah, I'm just going to talk about one of these actually because it will take less time. So just a little bit about me. I'm a socially engaged artist. I live in Bradford, been sort of working around this area since 2003. I've got a sort of interdisciplinary practice. So a lot of the time, the kind of projects, the form that they take varies. Sometimes it's kind of performances, publications, events, video games, as we'll sort of find out in a little bit. And I work sort of individually and as part of collectives as well, which included an art collective called Black Dogs, which was sort of operating around Leeds and across the UK sort of last decade. So a lot of the work that I do is like research based, sort of very much kind of based in the place where I'm doing it and co-produced with the people that may experience it as audiences. And in general, the kind of research and the themes that I'm interested in are about this kind of sort of undefined activity that sits somewhere between work and play, and then the kind of alternative forms of work and economies that might come out of that. I've also got, as a sort of musician, a very strong interest in DIY and grassroots culture. And I guess, again, from that kind of an interest in the commons and post-capitalist futures as well. Sorry, Toby, I'm just doing a bit of admin on the admitting people as well, which is frozen up my screen. So just, a very early project of mine, just to kind of explain how I got maybe interested in some of the some of those themes was a project where I made a replica of a chimney in Leeds from 8,000 cardboard bricks that I made as a sort of 9 till 5 production line in my studio for 3 months. The idea being that kind of doing monotonous and boring work, if it's on your own time, is less alienating than when you do it for other people. And kind of after this project in 2005, which is part of a public arts project in Leeds, I kind of started working a bit more with people as well. I got a bit more interested in kind of maybe not just how I saw labour and spare time and the relationship between those things, but how other people did as well. So I did a series of events across different sort of post-industrial towns in the north of England, including Leeds and Hull and Stoke-on-Trent and Rochdale and Oldham and Blackburn and places like that, called Festival of Pastimes, which was a kind of project where I mapped out spare time activity and self-organised and amateur activity in those areas by finding out about different groups and individuals that were doing stuff, made a publication about it, and then brought everyone together for a big sort of celebratory event, sometimes right in the middle of the town centre. Toby, are you able to see these images coming through? I'm just checking my screen's not frozen up. So I've got a lot of additional stuff popping up. And so that also involved, these events also involved different people coming together, but also kind of an engagement with audiences that would come by through a board game that I made called Significant Pursuits. In 2013, I was invited to do a residency in Istanbul. And I sort of use that as a way to sort of develop these ideas a bit more, to think about post-capitalist futures and kind of what a society based on alternative forms of work or play might look like, and did that through a postcard project, inviting people to to respond to questions and prompts about what a post-capitalist or post-work society might look like. That was also done online. So those are sort of projects that fed into the thing that I wanted to talk about, which was this project I did between 2018 and 2019 called Lootopia. And the starting point for that was I was invited to take part in a kind of artistic development project run by the University of Bedfordshire, where they would team up artists with a social engaged practice with kind of other people outside of their own discipline or departments within the university. And I suppose the kind of the journey for me with looking at this stuff around alternative forms of work and productive use of spare time had led me to this sort of question around, well, it's great to sort of celebrate what people do in their spare time and in their time outside of work, but who actually has spare time, and how can we democratize spare time so that it's not just a kind of privileged elite that get to use that. And that had sort of led me on to questions about universal basic income and thinking about the infrastructure that's required for people to have that time to engage in those sorts of activities. So I sort of approached this project in Luton, sort of understanding Luton as a place that's very similar to Bradford, where I'd been doing a lot of work for the last decade or so, and was facing similar sorts of challenges as a post-industrial town. And they decided to pair me up with the computer science department, who suggested, if you're going to have conversations and be gathering information and thinking about, how you might sort of create a form using the conversations that you're having, have you thought about a video game? And I was like, yes, that sounds absolutely great. So I decided to make a video game called Lootopia, where all of the content would be generated through, generated and contributed by real life Lutonians through these conversations about an alternative reality version of Luton, where there'd been the discovery of a renewable source of energy called Lutonium. That had made the town incredibly wealthy, and all of the profits of this were equally distributed amongst everyone that lives in Lootopia, and therefore they're living in a society where you can decide and choose how you want to spend your time, but whether that be in work or other activities. So in a sense, it works as a kind of critical simulation of a post-work future, or a serious game for testing the universal basic income policy, but I never really presented it as that. I never really used the words basic income. It was more sort of around this kind of fantasy narrative, but arrived at the same sort of conversations. So the way the workshops were run, I did them initially with kind of like a group of people within the university, and then started opening that out into local schools and kind of young people's projects and other arts groups in the city. And sort of explaining that we were creating this verbatim video game, so a kind of video game where all the content would be based in Luton, on real place in Luton, and using the dialogue that the dialogue would be created by them. And in that project, in the workshops, they were split into 3 bits. The first part was, okay, so in Lootopia, if if it's a situation where you never have to work again, how would you spend your time? Who would you be? What would you kind of miss from your previous life? Then we would sort of move it into a more collective discussion around kind of thinking about a place that we might be in. So normally trying to base it on either the place that we were in or a place that they knew in Luton. So it might be the library or a train station or the school in this case, or a pub. And then getting them to start to think about, well, what kind of situations might arise in these places in a post-work society. So if no one has to work anymore, who's doing the washing up, how are things sort of run, and what challenges might be faced. So these are kind of like 2-hour-long sessions, and I would kind of record the session and then use that as the basis for the dialogue in the game. The first stage for me was to kind of turn it into a very simple sort of choose your own adventure, kind of like point and click sort of Spectrum style video game, because that's what I was able to do myself. But I worked with another artist called Emily Garner in Leeds, who kind of does these nice 8-bit portraits and sort of turn the characters into sort of graphic portraits, and a games designer in Bradford who was able to sort of take this really rudimentary game that I'd done and turn it into a VR experience. So we took sort of, after 6 months of doing these workshops, this game back to Luton and had people play it. Can you hear the sounds? Okay, is that coming through? I'll send the links out for these so we don't have to spend too much time watching them. So I did this kind of public testing of the game, and it was picked up by Luton Borough Council, who were putting a pilot programme together for their City of Culture bid for 2025, themed around the Peace Day riots, which was kind of an interesting theme, where it was the 100th anniversary of the people of Luton burning down their own town hall in protest. So their kind of theme for this program was around people, power, passion, and kind of grassroots activity. And they wanted to kind of have a project that was also talking about the future of the town. So they funded me to do some more workshops, and we together decided to make those workshops with groups that normally wouldn't be part of a conversation about the future of the town. So that involved, high schools and young people, but young people at risk of exclusion from mainstream education, people with brain injury, a dementia cafe, vulnerable women's groups, and kind of various other sort of people that wouldn't normally be in that conversation about the future of their place. And the pitch that I'd made was that at the end of this development of the game, we would kind of do a public play of it, projected onto the town hall as a sort of public spectacle. And that that could be hosted by a local celebrity, and it would sort of be a bit more of a live event rather than just a kind of single gaming experience. So this is what the kind of like developed game ended up looking like. If you're playing it on the VR headset, this is what it feels like. You'll notice there's a Lootopia well-being level, which was kind of the way to encourage people to play it. So depending on the decisions that you make in these different scenarios that you enter, the well-being level goes up and down. And if you end the game with a well-being level, the Lootopia well-being level being over 100, then you get an offer of citizenship. And if not, you have to keep on playing. And so, we created this version of the game and kind of worked out a way of live streaming it and people sort of playing it as a kind of public spectacle. This is the test that we did at Leeds Beer Festival. It turned it into a sort of a bit like Games Master or something, like a kind of a public event for people to be thinking about this different version of Luton. And that was put into the finale event for this People Power Passion project in October. So people played it all day long. It was kind of projected onto these big screens behind them, so it was again a bit more of a kind of a collective kind of experience rather than just one person playing a video game. But importantly, around that, we also use things like talkioki, which people might be familiar with, to kind of facilitate discussions around, okay, well, how do we get from where we are now to Lootopia, or what's the actual implications of some of the stuff that's talked about in this game, which again may have kind of moved the conversation a bit more into universal basic income and what kind of resources and infrastructure already exists in Luton to allow those things to happen. So okay, I'll leave it at that because that's kind of probably a nice bit to hand over to Toby.
That's great, Andy. Just while I'm setting up my shared screen and everything, does anyone have any questions or clarifications from Andy?
I just wondered, what is Talkioki? How does that work?
So Talkioki is a project by the People Speak, which is kind of collective based in Hackney in London, and it's Mikey Vykoff is the kind of person who developed it, but it's basically a kind of pop-up talk show. So the desk that I showed is kind of, that's always part of it, and it kind of just appears in places. The host sits in the middle, and the idea is that you facilitate a discussion about absolutely anything that anyone wants to bring to the table. So it's the kind of a genderless kind of collective discussion method. And obviously we had that there, and the people were playing the video game Lootopia, and so it was a way of kind of people, I guess, processing some of the ideas that might be in it and moving them into the real world. But I'll put some links about Talkioki and the rest of it through the chat.